The Rarity system is a core mechanic of the Borderlands games. It makes players feel special and rewarded at various points during gameplay, making for a fundamental part of their core gameplay loop. But Gearbox haven't always been set on what they wanted with rarities in their games, and today we're going to highlight that by going through every rarity in the Borderlands franchise. Starting off right at the bottom, we've got the white rarity. This is present in every single Borderlands game, and it is the bottom of the barrel when it comes to a rarity. It starts as basically the first ever item rarity you'll see when you get in game, unless you have something like a pre-order bonus in the case of the pre-sequel, or the Borderlands 1 Game of the Year Edition Enhanced. Now while the white rarity isn't always unique, there is a unique as a part of this rarity in Borderlands 3 in the form of the Echo 2. This is a joke which is referenced in the opening of Borderlands 3, and it's actually in the game as a grenade, and you can only get it as a white rarity. But aside from that, there's nothing too important about white rarity weapons. They're the bottom of the barrel, the most boring versions of basically anything you can get. Moving on, we've got the green rarity. This is also present in every single Borderlands game, and this is obviously the step above the white rarity, and green, much like white, doesn't have anything really interesting about it. It serves as kind of that step between maybe level 5 to level 10. And this is where the player will start to see the guns getting slowly more interesting, maybe some new fresh camos on them that you wouldn't see with the white rarity in the case of Borderlands 3 for example. The player might start to feel a little bit more powerful using these weapons, but they're still going to understand that they're at the bottom of the totem pole here and they need to keep climbing if they're going to feel very powerful at all. Also, much like with Borderlands 3 having a unique weapon for the white rarity, there is also a unique weapon in the green rarity, being the Big Suck, and also in Borderlands 1 case, you can also get the Rider in the green rarity as a Gearbox weapon, which is why the concept of unique items for me isn't what classes a rarity as unique. There is no unique rarity to me, even though sometimes I may call the blue rarity unique. To me, a unique is just a weapon that has a red text and maybe a special effect. But speaking of which, let's move on to the blue rarity, and this is where you're going to start seeing things get a lot more interesting. Blue rarity weapons, which are featured once again in every Borderlands game, are going to feel a lot more powerful to the player. We spoke about getting different camos, which makes the weapon feel more unique, and it's the same here with blue. You'll also get stat boosts to this weapon much like you would with green, but these are going to be much higher, making the weapon feel a lot more powerful. And this is where Borderlands starts to introduce more and more unique weapons to the player. These are things which once again have red text on them describing the item in a unique way, and they'll often include a lot of pop culture references and more small Easter eggs on that gun, and maybe the gun's gonna also perform in the same way. But it's not also just guns, it can be stuff like shields, grenades, and much more. Some notable blue items which are also unique that come to mind is things like the Evil Smasher, the Sandhawk, the Rough Rider, and I could go on all day. But now moving on, let's go into the purple rarity. This is also featured in every single Borderlands game, and this is where to me it always feels like there's less unique purples than there is blues, but maybe I'm wrong about that. And purple weapons is going to be that final jump before the top tier rarity of the games, where you're going to really feel like you've hit the maximum power level you can be at before you start hunting down truly unique and powerful items. They're once again going to get a nice crispy stat boost, which is going to make you feel a lot stronger as a player. They're also going to be worth a lot more, which is something we didn't touch on with the other rarities. There's always this curve of value with any of these rarities, and purple is definitely one which makes you feel like, okay, I'm near the end of the game now. Before this I was just climbing that ladder very slowly, but now I'm at purple. The next big jump from here is going to be into end game loot. There is also going to be uniques in this category like there was in the blue category, and basically all of the other categories too. Some that come to mind are the crit from Borderlands 2, which got a mega buff by Gearbox, quickly becoming basically the strongest SMG in the game. And this rarity isn't just limited to guns, shields and whatnot, it's also got stuff like skins which you can pick up for your player, or trinkets in the case of Borderlands 3. Now next up we have E-Tech, and E-Tech is kind of the rarity in between blue and in between purple. It shows up during Borderlands 2, and E-Tech in a nutshell, like I said, is in between blue and purple, but the main difference is that it shoots these energy projectiles. Sometimes you might have these plasma balls that get fired from it. You might have the needle weapons which shoot these timed needles that then explode after a certain amount of time. And while we would get weapons similar to this in Borderlands 3, the Rarity itself really only made a main appearance in Borderlands 2, where the player is introduced to E-Tech as a whole through the Dr. Z murder mystery mission, where it's revealed that Doc Mercy, who's another medical practitioner, has been using E-Tech for the wrong reasons. But yeah, nothing too crazy about E-Tech. It is a really cool rarity, and I do love the plasma casters in Borderlands 2, but it's one of those rarities where I'm not too disappointed that they removed it and then ended up meshing it with other weapons and other rarities, but it would be cool to see it return back in its true form as a rarity in Borderlands 4. Now, with basically the lower tier rarities out of the way, let's get into the end game rarities for these games. The first one we're going to start with is, of course, the most widely known one to basically everybody in the casual group of players, I would say. Pretty much everybody is going to come across this rarity in their time playing the games without having to do any searching for much more. And of course, I'm talking about the legendary rarity, which takes place in every single Borderlands game. Now, legendary is where things go from being just slightly better with a new damage stat increase to being legitimately unique items. The whole gimmick of legendary is that they all have their own special effects, their own red text, sometimes a custom weapon skin or camo on the shields or the grenades, and they do something unique. There are so many legendaries in Borderlands, and every single one of them is pretty much unique in its own way. Sometimes they'll be brought back in other games to pay homage to previous entries that showcase the same item, but the core concept for legendary is that it's something you'll be unlocking when you reach endgame. Now, unfortunately, in my opinion, this is where Gearbox started to go wrong, and over time have become too comfortable with their loot system, thinking that legendary is just fine for the top tier endgame rarity, and a lot of players in the community have been asking for more. They want that pinnacle, and we'll be talking about that after this rarity, but it does really feel like, especially in Borderlands 3, Gearbox just felt like legendary should be the top of the mountain and nothing more past it. But as you'll see in our next entry coming up here, there are more rarities in the Borderlands franchise that players will look to instead of legendary at endgame. It is also important to note that in Borderlands 1 there are kind of two types of legendaries, being a light orange and a dark orange. But enough talking about this rarity, let's get into what I was just referring to being the more endgame, sought after, rarer trophy items that players seek at endgame, and we're going to start off with the most popular one, which is pearlescent rarity. This rarity is present in Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2, as it would later be cut from the franchise entirely. The pearlescent rarity is basically a step up from legendary, with the only difference being how rare it is to come across. In the case of Borderlands 1, players would farm for hours and hours and hours, sometimes days or even weeks on end, just to get a pearlescent at endgame. The reason why? Well, because it felt rare to them, and they liked the chase. They liked the idea of going after something that no one else could really get their hands on. I mean, sure, you who is watching this video may be a more experienced, or even, dare I say, a veteran of the Borderlands franchise or looter shooters in general, and you might be able to be dedicated enough to go to endgame and take on the endgame content and get lucky enough to get a pearlescent. Now, pearlescents would become a little easier to come across in the case of Borderlands 2, and there would also be many more of them. But many players would also tell you that the Borderlands 1 pearlescent rarity weapons were just better in terms of their overall performance. One of the biggest complaints that always comes up with pearls is that they are really bad. They are not balanced well. However, I've always said that this is such a poor argument to make against the rarity and should instead be a complaint made against the game. Borderlands 2 has incredibly horrible balancing, and there is so many examples of this, not just in the pearlescent rarity. We're also talking about things like the unkempt herald right at the start of the game, and just being placed there in general and being able to carry the player to literally the hardest content at endgame. And so whenever I see people criticize the pearlescent rarity in 2 for being extremely bad and the reason why they don't want it back in later games, I always tell them to reconfigure their mindset and think about the possibility that this isn't the fault of the rarity, and more so the fault of the balancing. But unfortunately, the last time we would see the pearlescent rarity is in Borderlands 2. And speaking of something we would only see in Borderlands 2 for the last time, let's also talk about the next rarity up, which is going to be serif. Now, serif only appears in Borderlands 2, and to a lot of people it's even better than the pearlescent rarity in terms of introduction. Now, serif items basically do the same thing yet again that a legendary item does. They are special, unique items which are made to feel even more special by locking them behind a piece of the game that certain players won't get to, and that's just perfectly fine. Not every rarity needs to be this extremely over-the-top unique concept. It is okay to just have an item which isn't accessible to everyone. A quote that I saw recently from a Helldivers dev was that a game for everyone is a game for no one, and I definitely agree there. Now, serif rarity is introduced at endgame, specifically in the DLCs. There are raid boss type enemies called serifs, and once you go and kill the serifs, you will be able to get serif crystals dropped to you. You can also get serif crystals in the one-shot standalone for Borderlands 2, and you can then take your serif crystals to a serif vendor, which will be located somewhere in that DLC, and they will be able to sell you serif items for your serif crystals. So a lot more depth than pearlescence, and the good thing about these serif items is that they're actually really good. A lot of endgame builds use serif items, and that is exactly how an endgame rarity should feel. But once again, for some bizarre reason, this rarity did not return in Borderlands 3 later on. Will we see it in Borderlands 4? Who knows, but it did not come back in Borderlands 3, and the last time we would ever see it is in Borderlands 2. Now let's take a small break for a second and jump to the pre-sequel, where we're going to talk about the glitch rarity. This was a one-off rarity which you would only see in this game, and the glitch rarity is hailed by pretty much everybody in the community, it feels like, as the most unique rarity we've ever seen in Borderlands. The concept for a glitch weapon is that you'll find it out in the world, it'll have that pink salmon beam, almost reminiscent of a serif item, but what's interesting is that the card is going to have 4 letters on it, and depending on the number you get next to that specific letter, it will increase the chance of that glitch effect proccing on the weapon when you reload. This can be anything from a railgun type effect or an infinite loop effect, which turns the weapon into basically a minigun with almost infinite ammo in that clip. The glitch rarity is introduced in the Claptastic Voyage DLC, which, surprise surprise, is also hailed as one of, if not the best DLCs of all time in the Borderlands franchise. But yeah, sadly we would never see this rarity ever again in Borderlands, which is a real shame because it feels like the most unique idea they've ever come up with. Now, moving on to our final true rarity, we're going to jump back to Borderlands 2 for a second for the Effervescent aka Rainbow rarity. Now, just before Borderlands 3 would release, Gearbox dropped the Commander Lilith and Fight for Sanctuary DLC to hype up the game's release and get players caught up to speed on the story. The Rainbow rarity would be found within this DLC, as it's most commonly referred to, and this is basically a rarity which basically takes old gear you've already seen in the game, it feels like, giving it a rainbow color, a nice rainbow text on the card, and in most cases adding a set bonus effect to the item. A lot of the Rainbow rarity items have direct synergy with themselves getting unique effect when you pair them together, and this is something which I'm pretty sure we've only seen in Borderlands 2 with the Law and Order combo, but this was a big step because players really felt like with the introduction of gear sets, Borderlands was about to elevate itself to becoming the true king of looter shooters if it wasn't already by adding gear sets to their games. However, unfortunately, and this seems to be becoming a pattern, this would not carry over into Borderlands 3, where the loot system would return to being that very cookie cutter 1 to 5 progression scale of white, green, blue, purple, legendary. So rest in peace, Rainbow rarity, I'm sure you will be missed dearly. And now just just to tie off the video, I want to talk about some of the secret rarities that are in the Borderlands games. Now, there is quite a lot to go through, which means I'm not going to cover all of them because a lot of them are just very obscure, and honestly, I'm not even sure if my information is correct with a lot of them, but there are some that I do want to go over which should be mentioned. The first one is obviously the Health Vial rarity and the Shield Booster rarity. These are both consumables that can be picked up in game to restore your shield, your health, and also give you effects. Speaking of effects, you can also get candy pickups in the Hallowed Hollow Headhunter for Borderlands 2, and these also give you boosters when you pick them up, and they are also these shield booster concepts as well, and you can get these in Borderlands 3 also, although not in candy form. Basically, these all fall under the umbrella of being shield booster items, and they are also present in Borderlands 1. The next rarity, and probably the most common rarity, is money. Money is actually a rarity in Borderlands, believe it or not, and it is something that you find throughout the world a lot. You pick it up, you get cash, you can go and spend that cash. Pretty self-explanatory, and yeah, money is its own rarity. Now, not far behind this is of course Eridium. Eridium is yet another currency in Borderlands, and it has its own rarity in the game files. It is its own thing entirely. I could be wrong, but I also think the Torg token currency in the Borderlands 2 Torg DLC is its own rarity entirely, although I'm pretty sure also they just give it the purple rarity, so if someone knows more, feel free to let me know in the comments. We've got the mission rarity. Yes, there is actually a mission item rarity, and this is that cyan beam that you'll see indicating the location of a mission pickup that you might need to complete a side quest, and yes, that is its own rarity. And the last one I want to talk about is the Moxie drink rarity. The EchoCast extension for Borderlands 3, which I believe is now shut down, had an option where you could get the streamer you're watching a care package of Moxie drinks that they could pick up in game to get a buff, and believe it or not, this is its own rarity in the Borderlands 3 files. It is quite literally the Moxie drink rarity, and that makes it a secret rarity, which is pretty cool. I guess they could fit another rarity into Borderlands 3 after all. But that's gonna do it for the secret rarities. I'm sure I'm missing a few, and feel free to let me know in the comments if you know of any more that I left out here. I'm sure there is a ton more that I'm just not thinking of, but I feel like if I go over all of them, I'm going to be here all night, so we're going to leave it there for now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to drop a like on it and sub to the channel for more content. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.